imagine you have the absolute most flawless resume in your entire industry.
Right, like the perfect pedigree.
Exactly. You went to the right schools, you acquired the right degrees, and your technical skills are just, well, they are completely unmatched.
You're objectively the smartest one there.
Yeah, you are objectively the most capable person in your department. But here's the thing. Statistically speaking, you are still highly likely to lose the next executive promotion to someone who is, noticeably less qualified than you are.
Which is incredibly frustrating.
Oh, it's infuriating. But why does it happen? Because you are treating your career like a hardware problem when it is actually a network problem.
Right.
So welcome to The Deep Dive. I'm your host, and today we are exploring a really fascinating source document titled The Social Architecture of Success, Mastering Professional Networking Vocabulary.
And it is a brilliant document. I'm the expert for today's dive, and I'm really excited to get into this with you.
Same here. And our mission for you, the listener, as we go through this material together, is to really decode this secret language of opportunity.
Because it really is a secret language, isn't it?
It totally is. We want to help you transition from simply being a technically proficient, a worker, to a connected professional.
It is a critical transition to make.
Yeah.
And it requires fundamentally rewiring how you view success.
Yeah.
When you read through this document, you realize that networking isn't just this basic surface level concept of like meeting people at a mixer.
Right, just handing out business cards and smiling.
Exactly. It's not that at all. It is a complex, highly nuanced system of power dynamics, resource allocation, and strategic positioning.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at the architectural, the financial, and the social metaphors outlined in this text to understand not just what these terms mean, but really why understanding this specific vocabulary of the inner circle is essential for your long-term career survival.
Survival and growth, right.
Yes. Because if you don't speak this language, you simply cannot navigate the territory.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can even begin to learn the language of networking, the text forces us to confront why networking is a mandatory, not an optional skill.
It shatters a lot of illusions.
It really does. The source starts by completely shattering that very common career myth we just touched on in the intro, the myth of pure meritocracy.
Right, the idea that just being good is enough.
Yeah, and it makes this definitive, almost brutal claim that you can be the smartest person in the room, possess brilliant leadership skills, and hold that flawless resume. But if you are an island, your growth is eventually going to hit a hard ceiling.
And the choice of the word island in the source text is, well, it's highly intentional.
Oh, so.
Think about the defining characteristic of an island. It is isolated, right? It is totally disconnected from the mainland.
Right.
It might be a beautiful island.
Yeah.
It might possess abundant natural resources.
Which would be like your skills.
Exactly. In this context, those resources represent your raw talent, your work ethic, your pristine resume.
Yeah.
But without a port or, without a bridge or shipping routes to actually trade those resources, its value just remains entirely self-contained.
You can't go anywhere.
Right. An island cannot scale. It cannot grow beyond its own geographic boundaries. So your talent, no matter how immense it is just geographically trapped within yourself.
Man, that really brings to mind an analogy I was thinking about while reading this section. Think of your career right now, for you listening, like a high-end smartphone.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. So your resume, your education, your raw talent, your ability to code or write or analyze data, that is all the internal hardware.
The specs.
Right. The specs. It's the lightning-fast processor, the incredible camera, the expanded memory.
That is your technical proficiency. It's the sum total of what you can accomplish in pure isolation.
Right. But without a cellular network or a Wi-Fi connection, what is that top-of-the-line phone really good for?
Not much.
You can take pictures, you can use the calculator, maybe write some notes in the app.
Play solitaire.
Yeah, exactly. But you can't send a message. You can't access the internet. You can't actually interface with the world. The phone's utility is just severely limited.
It's isolated.
And that connection, that invisible cellular network, is what the text introduces as social capital. The source defines this explicitly as the value derived from your social networks.
Right.
Without that social capital, your beautiful high-end smartphone of a career basically has no signal. Being an island means you have 0 bars.
That hardware analogy actually perfectly explains the ceiling metaphor from the text, too.
How so?
Well, why does talent alone cap it? Why do you hit a ceiling if you're an island? Because the test argues that at a certain level of any industry, and it doesn't matter if you are in tech or law, finance, the arts.
Right, at any field.
Yeah, at a certain level, everyone is talented.
That's a scary thought.
It is. Once you reach the director level or, the executive suite, talent is completely commoditized. Everyone in that room has a flawless resume. Everyone is a brilliant leader. Your hardware is just no longer unique.
So if the internal hardware is identical across the board, the only thing that actually separates the winners from the losers is the strength of their network connection.
That is the ultimate differentiator. And the source emphasizes that understanding this fundamental truth is the catalyst. It's what transforms you from a mere worker into a connected professional.
A worker being the island.
Exactly. A worker relies entirely on their own output. But a connected professional leverages the output, the influence, and the resources of an entire network.
Wow.
And what the document points out is that we have developed a very specific vocabulary to describe this invisible network.
Because it's invisible, we need ways to talk about it.
Right. Because social capital is abstract, we rely on these vivid physical metaphors. So we use architectural structures, physical spaces, financial systems. We use those to map out how it all works.
Which takes us to the very first phase of this system. How do we actually begin building this social capital?
The physical infrastructure.
Right. The text points us first to the literal infrastructure of human connection, which are the architectural metaphors. Because if you are an island, you need infrastructure to reach the mainland.
You need a way across.
Exactly.
Right.
And the most basic goal of networking, according to the text, is creating a connection, which it defines with the term building bridges.
What's fascinating here is the underlying assumption of that metaphor. Like, why do we build a bridge in the physical world?
To get over something.
Right, we build it to cross an obstacle, a river, a chasm, some treacherous piece of terrain.
Right.
The text applies this to the professional world by defining building bridges as establishing a friendly, cooperative relationship where there was previously no connection.
Or even negative connection.
Crucially, yes, where there was actual tension.
See, that's the part that stands out to me. It's not just about connecting two easy points on a map. It's about spanning a divide. The text gives this very specific example of a professional who spends a year collaborating on industry standards with a competitor's product team.
Wow, a competitor.
Yeah, they're literally building a bridge over a river of corporate rivalry.
And consider the strategic value of that action based on the source's framework. By building a bridge to a competitor, you are creating a formalized structure over an obstacle of natural suspicion.
You're engineering it.
Yes, you are engineering a pathway for the exchange of ideas, for mutual benefit, and for future communication. You are intentionally reducing your own isolation.
But it takes work.
It takes so much work.
Yeah.
The engineering requires careful planning, risk assessment, and above all, mutual trust. A bridge cannot be built from one side alone.
Right, you just have a pier.
Exactly. It requires both sides to agree to meet in the middle.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because architecture isn't just about construction. It is also about demolition.
Oh, yes.
And the text introduces the dangerous, highly destructive opposite of building a bridge, which is burning bridges.
And this is perhaps the most severe warning in the entire source document.
The imagery is incredibly vivid. You cross a bridge, you get to the other side, and then you just set it on fire behind you.
Yeah, burn it to the ground.
Yeah, you make it physically impossible to ever go back. The text defines this as destroying a relationship so completely that you can never rely on that person for a reference, a lead, or, a job in the future.
Right.
And the specific example the source gives is an angry employee yelling at the CEO in front of everyone when they're quitting.
We really need to analyze the permanence of fire in this metaphor, because the text makes it very clear that this isn't just your standard disagreement.
Right. It's not a normal argument.
No, in a professional setting, you will have conflicts.
Yeah.
You will have misunderstandings that can be smoothed over with an apology, or maybe a frank conversation over coffee.
Sure.
But burning a bridge implies a total chemical change in the relationship. Fire consumes the materials.
It turns to ash.
Exactly. The trust, the goodwill, the shared history, it has turned to ash.
Right.
You cannot unburn a bridge.
But the real danger isn't just losing that one bridge, is it? When you read the text's explanation of why leaving a job on bad terms carries these long-term consequences that literally haunt a career, it's really about the collateral damage.
That is the concept of network decay.
Network decay, right.
When you burn a bridge to a specific person, so let's use the source's example of the CEO you insulted on your way out the door.
Yeah.
You don't just lose access to that one individual CEO.
You lose everyone they know.
Yes, you lose access to their entire network graph. You lose every single road connected to the other side of that bridge.
Wow.
If they move to a new company, you can never work there. If they sit on a board of directors, you can never get funding from them. If they have a close colleague who respects them, well, that colleague is now completely off limits to you as well.
It spreads.
The destruction is not linear, it is exponential.
You are essentially taking that high-end smartphone and intentionally smashing the internal antenna.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, you are forcing yourself back into being an island, but this time the isolation is completely self-inflicted and it's permanent.
And the text notes that this is exactly why emotional regulation is a critical component of social capital.
Because it feels good in the moment.
Right. The momentary catharsis of yelling at that CEO might feel incredible for 5 minutes, but the structural damage to your professional architecture lasts a lifetime.
So, assuming we have emotional regulation, and assuming we are diligently building bridges rather than burning them.
Right, we're being good architects.
We've laid the groundwork, we've crossed the obstacle. But where do these bridges actually lead? According to the source material, they don't just lead to open fields.
No, they don't.
They lead to closed rooms. And this brings us to the next evolution of the architectural metaphors in the text, which is access and thresholds.
Because a bridge merely gets you to the perimeter of the building, right?
Just to the outside.
Yeah, it brings you to the structure where the opportunity actually lives, but you still have to get inside.
Right. And the text introduces the concept of opening doors. The door represents an exclusive opportunity. It could be a highly sought-after job interview, a private meeting with a VIP, or, an invitation to a secret, unannounced project.
Something hidden.
Exactly. The defining characteristic here is that these doors are locked to the general public.
Well, if the opportunity were open to everyone, it wouldn't be behind a door.
It would just be in the lobby.
Right, it would be out in the public square. The door is a mechanism of artificial scarcity and exclusivity.
But someone you've built a strong bridge with might have the key. The text explains that when someone opens a door for you, they are using their influence to give you access to something you fundamentally could not reach on your own.
Right.
The source gives an example of an old mentor opening doors in the venture capital world, which leads to a founder's first big investment, or like a highly respected teacher opening doors for their graduates at top firms.
If we look closely at the power dynamics of opening doors, as it's described in the text, we see a state of total reliance.
Total reliance.
Yeah. In this specific metaphor, you are not the one taking the action to open the door. You are entirely dependent on the external power, the established influence, and the accumulated social capital of your connection.
Because they have the key.
Exactly. They are the gatekeepers, or at least they have enough leverage with the gatekeeper to turn the lock. They are vouching for you, essentially lending you their social capital for a brief moment so you can cross the threshold.
But I'm looking at this and thinking about the reality for most people, especially early in their careers.
It's tough early on.
Right. What if you don't have a mentor with the key? What if you haven't accumulated those powerful connections yet? The text offers a secondary threshold metaphor that feels very, very different, which is getting a foot in the door.
It's a much more visceral, physical image than politely waiting for someone to open a door for you.
It really is. The text describes this as securing a small, perhaps low-level, initial opportunity that you use to physically stop the door from closing.
A literal wedge.
Yeah, a wedge. You aren't fully inside the room, but you are preventing the opportunity from disappearing, allowing you to move up to something bigger later.
Yep.
The specific examples from the source are taking an unpaid internship as a way into a top-tier law firm, or starting as a low-level freelancer at a massive agency just to get on their vendor list.
It's about securing proximity.
Now, I want to ask you, and I want you listening to really consider this as well, is getting a foot in the door really worth it if the position is low-level or worse, unpaid?
That's the big question.
If we take that law firm example from the text, You are essentially working for free, doing grunt work just to have your shoe wedged in a door frame. It's really hard not to read that and see it as just a blatant defense of corporate exploitation.
That is a very valid pushback. And honestly, it is a structural critique of how a lot of industries operate today.
Right, because they rely on free labor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if we analyze this strictly through the logic of the source text architecture of success, we have to look at the distinct physics and mechanisms of these two different metaphors.
I got it. Okay.
As we discussed, opening doors is a passive state for the individual. You wait for the mentor's influence to do the work.
You wait to be invited.
Right. Getting a foot in the door, however, is an active, highly aggressive maneuver.
It implies the door is actively trying to close on you.
Exactly. It implies the opportunity is fleeting, the hiring window is shutting, or the competition is about to seal you out entirely. So you slide your foot in.
You take the hit.
You take the hit. You are taking on the immediate discomfort, perhaps the significant financial and personal discomfort of an unpaid internship or a grueling freelance gig just to secure physical proximity to the opportunity. The text clearly states that this small opportunity is merely a tool. It is a wedge.
You aren't meant to live your life wedged in a door frame.
Precisely. You aren't meant to keep your foot there forever. It is a temporary, highly strategic state meant to wedge the door open just enough so you can eventually leverage your internal hardware, your talent and work ethic to push your whole body through.
And move up to something bigger.
Right. The text frames it not as exploitation, but as a calculated short-term sacrifice of comfort for long-term access.
So it's the difference between being formally invited into the VIP room and like sneaking in through the kitchen while the bouncer isn't looking.
That's a great analogy.
The methods are vastly different, the comfort levels are different, but the ultimate goal is identical. Get inside the room.
Because the threshold must be crossed if you want to stop being an island.
Okay, so let's assume we've crossed it. You've built the bridge, you've bypassed the locked doors, either through a mentor's influence or your own aggressive wedge.
You're in.
You are now physically inside the room. But the source text makes it very clear that simply being inside isn't the end of the journey.
Not at all.
The landscape of the metaphors shifts completely here. We move away from architectural barriers and move into social and spatial positioning. How does the language describe our social positioning once we are inside the room with the power players?
This introduces a really fascinating sociological concept found in the text, which is proximity to power.
Proximity to power.
Right. Once the barriers are gone, the question becomes, where are you actually standing in the room?
The first term the text brings up to describe this is rubbing elbows with. It means associating, socializing, or spending time with people of high status.
Right.
The text paints this picture of being in a crowded, highly exclusive room, standing so close to important people that your elbows physically touch.
Notice the spatial dynamics of that metaphor, though. It implies a complete lack of formal barriers.
Because you're right next to them.
Exactly. You are no longer separated by a reception desk or a security gate or a giant boardroom table. You are sharing the same physical space, literally the same oxygen.
The source examples really highlight the exclusivity of this. It mentions being at the World Economic Forum and socializing with prime ministers and tech billionaires.
Or a charity gala.
Yeah, being at a charity gala and meeting the city's top philanthropists. Just very high-level spaces.
If we connect this to the bigger picture that text is drawing, rubbing elbows is the immediate, tangible reward of getting your foot in the door.
It's the payoff.
Yes, you have achieved physical proximity to massive influence. You are finally in the room where the decisions are made.
But this is where the text adds a crucial layer of nuance. It distinguishes between just being in the room and actually holding power in the room.
Which are very different things.
Right. Just because you are rubbing elbows with a tech billionaire at Davos doesn't mean they are going to fund your startup the next morning.
And that is a mistake many, many professionals make. They confuse proximity with trust.
Oh, that's a good way to phrase it.
Rubbing elbows is fundamentally about being a face in the crowd, albeit a very exclusive, high-status crowd. It is casual. It is fleeting.
You're just a guy there.
Right. You are seen, you are acknowledged, but you are not yet essential. Physical proximity does not automatically translate to social capital. It is merely the prerequisite for it.
Which brings us to the ultimate destination in the source text roadmap of social architecture, which is the inner circle.
The Holy Grail.
Right. Let's visualize this, because the text asks us to imagine a series of concentric rings. Picture a massive target painted on the ground.
Okay.
The outermost ring is the general public, They're outside the building entirely. They don't even have a bridge.
They're on the islands.
Yeah, exactly. The middle ring represents the employees, the vendors, the people who have gotten through the door. This is where the rubbing of elbows happens.
Right.
You are in the building, you are near the power, but you are still on the periphery. But right in the center, the absolute bullseye is the inner circle.
The nucleus of power.
The text defines this inner circle as a small, highly exclusive group with the most trust, the most influence, and crucially, the most inside information.
Information is key here.
The specific example given in the text is a trusted advisor to the leadership where, quote, nothing happens in this company without her knowing about it.
That quote regarding information flow is the defining characteristic of the inner circle. Nothing happens without her knowing. In the middle ring, where you are just rubbing elbows, information is filtered. You hear things after they're decided.
You get the press release.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in the inner circle, you are part of the information genesis. You are shaping the decisions before they ever become public.
So the obvious question the text raises is, how do you get from the middle ring, where you're just rubbing elbows, to that bullseye? How do you transition from proximity to trust?
The text explicitly states the requirement, and it is a heavy one. It says, entering the inner circle requires years of loyalty and results.
Years.
Years. This is the massive, undeniable leap between being seen and being trusted. Anyone with enough money or a clever enough wedge can eventually find their way into a gala to rub elbows with philanthropists.
Sure, you can buy a ticket.
Right. But you cannot buy your way into the inner circle. You cannot aggressively wedge your foot into it. It requires sustained, proven value demonstrated over time.
So it's not a quick hack.
No, it is the difference between being a recognizable face in the VIP section and being the single person the CEO calls when they have a catastrophic crisis at 2 a.m.
Years of loyalty and results. That phrase introduces a completely different dimension to networking. Up until this point in the text, we've been talking entirely about physical space and architecture.
Bridges, doors, elbows.
Right, touching elbows, concentric circles. But suddenly, to get to that center bullseye, we are talking about time.
Time and the highly strategic investment of relational resources, which is exactly where the source document takes us for the final evolution of this vocabulary. We shift from the spatial metaphors to the financial and strategic metaphors.
Right. So how do you actually survive in these rooms and earn those years of loyalty required to penetrate the inner circle?
How do you spend your time?
Exactly. The text introduces a concept pulled directly from sports and game theory, playing the long game.
This represents a crucial pivot in professional mindset.
Instead of trying to score a quick point or secure an immediate win, you make strategic moves that might not pay off for months or even years.
You have to be patient.
Yeah. In the specific context of networking, the text defines playing the long game as building a genuine relationship over time without asking for anything immediately.
This raises an important question about human psychology, though, and why playing the long game is actually incredibly difficult in practice.
Why do you think it's so hard?
Because playing the long game requires an incredible amount of emotional discipline. It requires actively overriding human nature's baseline desire for immediate gain and instant gratification.
Which is really strong.
It is. When you finally get your foot in the door, when you finally find yourself rubbing elbows with a prime minister or a tech billionaire, the overwhelming immediate human impulse is to extract value.
Right. You want to say, can you help me?
Yes. Can you fund my project? Can you hire me?
You finally got the winning lottery ticket in your hand, and you just want to cash it in immediately before the opportunity vanishes.
Exactly. The fear of missing out drives people to be entirely transactional. But the text provides a beautiful example of the restraint required for the long game.
Right.
It mentions a professional who spends 2 full years sending interesting, highly relevant articles to a contact, checking in once a quarter without ever once asking for a favor.
2 years of just giving.
2 years, or an employee who proves their value relentlessly over an entire year before even initiating a conversation about a raise. They are planting seeds and patiently watering them, fully aware that the harvest is multiple seasons away.
So what does this all mean for the listener? If we translate this psychological discipline into a stark, unbreakable rule from the text, it is this. A true professional never asks for a favor the first time they meet someone.
Never.
Never.
Yeah.
And the reason for this rule is explained by the final metaphor the text introduces, which reveals the underlying economics of all these relationships, calling in a favor.
The text uses the metaphor of a bank account to explain this mechanism, which I think is just brilliant because everyone understands how a bank works.
It is a bank account of social capital and good deeds.
Right.
Every time you help someone out, every time you send that interesting article, every time you offer your expertise without charging for it, you are making a deposit into this relational bank account.
You're funding it.
Yes. Calling in a favor, then, is making a withdrawal. You are asking the other person to help you based entirely on the fact that you have funded the account with your past help.
It operates on the sociological principle of reciprocity. Relationships are cumulative. They are built on a ledger of mutual benefit.
The examples the source gives illustrate this perfectly. It mentions asking a former boss for a recommendation for a board of directors position, or asking an old college friend for a high-level introduction to an editor at a major publication.
Notice the specific adjectives used in those examples from the text.
Which ones?
A former boss. An old college friend.
Right.
These are relationships with deep historical bank accounts. They have been funded over years of shared experiences and mutual deposits.
They aren't new connections.
No, they're not. If you ignore the long game, if you try to ask for a massive favor the very first time you meet someone at a networking event, you are essentially trying to pull a massive withdrawal from a bank account that you just opened 5 minutes ago and haven't deposited a single cent into.
The transaction declines?
The transaction declines, and worse, you trigger a fraud alert.
Oh, wow, yes.
You overdraw your social capital account immediately. You look purely transactional, not relational. And as the text makes abundantly clear, transactional people never make it into the inner circle.
They stay on the outside.
The inner circle is exclusively reserved for people with massive, well-funded bank accounts of mutual trust and years of reciprocal favors.
When you lay it all out like that, connecting the architecture to the spatial dynamics to the financial ledger, it really is a complete ecosystem of professional survival.
It's totally comprehensive.
Let's synthesize the journey we've just mapped out from this text, the complete social architecture of success.
Okay, let's do it.
We started with that harsh realization that talent alone has a ceiling. Your brilliant internal hardware is completely useless without a signal. Being an island caps your growth. You absolutely need social capital.
You need the infrastructure. So you start by building bridges, engineering cooperative pathways across obstacles and rivals.
Right.
All while remaining terrified of the permanent exponential network decay that comes from burning them.
Then those bridges lead you to the thresholds, the closed doors. You either rely on the borrowed influence of a powerful mentor to open the door for you, or you sacrifice short-term comfort to aggressively wedge your foot in the door.
Just stopping it from closing long enough to slip inside.
Exactly. And once you cross that threshold, you find yourself rubbing elbows with the elite, sharing physical space with influence. But you recognize that proximity is an illusion of power. It isn't actual trust.
So to bridge that gap between proximity and trust, you transition to the financial dimension.
The long game.
You play the long game. You override the primal urge for immediate gratification, slowly making deposits into the favor bank account over years of loyalty.
So that when the critical moment arrives, you have the relational capital to successfully call in a massive favor.
And if you execute every single step of this architecture flawlessly, you move from the outer rings of the general public past the middle rings of the employees and the elbow rubbers.
And you arrive at the bullseye, the inner circle.
You become the trusted advisor.
The one where nothing happens without you knowing. Mastering these concepts is what the text promises will move you from being merely technically proficient to being strategically powerful.
It is a phenomenal, albeit intense, roadmap. And I think it's important to ask you, the listener, to reflect on your own career path right now based on the tension between these metaphors.
Right. Where do you fit in?
When you look at your own professional instincts, which of these approaches do you naturally lean toward?
Do you think it is more important to be the patient architect? To quietly, play the long game, meticulously building bridges and making small deposits into the favor bank over years, waiting for the interest to compound? Or do you find that in today's highly competitive, fast-paced market, it's better to be aggressive, prioritizing getting your foot in the door at all costs, even if it means taking unpaid work just to force your way into the room before the opportunity vanishes?
It is the classic debate of strategic patience versus relentless hustle, painted through the vocabulary of opportunity.
Right.
Recognizing your own default setting is really the mandatory first step to actually mastering the vocabulary.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over. Something that builds on the source material, but points directly toward our current reality.
Let's hear it.
We've just spent this entire time analyzing a vocabulary that is fundamentally built on the physics of physical space. We talked about constructing literal bridges over rivers.
We talked about keys turning in heavy locked doors.
We talked about the physical friction of touching elbows in a crowded room and sitting physically in an inner circle.
The entire framework relies on tangible physical imagery of human bodies interacting in shared spaces.
But look at the world we live in right now. In an increasingly remote, digital-first, Zoom-heavy professional world where we rarely share physical space with our colleagues, let alone our industry peers, how do we adapt this social architecture?
That is the modern dilemma that the text implies, but leaves for us to solve. The architecture is becoming entirely invisible.
How do you rub elbows when you don't even have elbows in the same room?
Right.
How do you wedge your foot in the door when the door is just a password-protected digital lobby on a video call? It's a massive challenge to think about how these vital, timeless metaphors translate to the virtual workspace.
Because the need for social capital hasn't changed.
Not at all. The ceiling of pure talent is still there, waiting for you to hit your head against it. But the blueprint, well, like we said at the very beginning, that clean engineering blueprint of how to build a career is gone.
The water is murky.
Very murky. But hopefully today we've given you the vocabulary to at least start navigating the current.
Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute precision.
Right, like it's just objective fact.
Exactly. It's like engineering.
Yeah.
You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points to the illuminated film and says, there it is. That's the fracture.
Right. It's totally binary, broken or not broken.
Yeah, it's clean. And honestly, it's incredibly comforting. We desperately like things to be visible, to be neatly categorized, to have a definitive answer that everyone in the room can agree on just by looking at it.
Oh, for sure. Because if you can see it, you can fix it. You know exactly what forces are at play.
But then you step into the professional world. You step into the realm of human interaction, office politics, corporate influence, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just, it's completely broken.
Yeah, it doesn't work at all in that environment.
Not even a little. We're looking at a landscape of success and power that is, for all intents and purposes, entirely invisible. It's murky. It's ambiguous.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. I mean, you can't put an x-ray over a corporate hierarchy and immediately see who actually holds the power.
You really can't.
You can look at an organizational chart, sure, but that org chart rarely reflects how decisions are really getting made or how deals are truly getting done behind closed doors. The official structure is almost never the actual structure.
Which is terrifying if you don't know the rules.
Yeah.
But what if you could see it? What if you could flip a switch and illuminate the actual power dynamics in your office or your industry?
That would be a superpower.
It really would. And today, we're focusing on you, the learner, and we are essentially handing you a decoder ring. We've got our hands on an incredibly insightful set of notes from an advanced masterclass titled The Currency of Connections.
The premise of this curriculum is just brilliant.
It is. It argues that if you want to understand the unspoken economy of favors that runs the professional world, you don't look at spreadsheets, you look at the English language, specifically advanced idiomatic English.
What's fascinating here is how our language has naturally evolved to describe this completely invisible economy.
Right.
These masterclass notes point out that we use this rich, highly specific tapestry of metaphors to explain social capital. We borrow from the theater, we borrow from biology, from historical fashion, and even from electrical engineering.
Wow. So it's all over the place.
Yeah. And we don't do this just to be colorful. These phrases are psychological blueprints. They reveal exactly how human beings perceive power, manipulation, and dependency.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we are taught as kids that if you put your head down, do good work, play by the rules, the system will reward you.
The great myth.
The myth of the perfect meritocracy, exactly.
Right.
But anyone who has spent more than 5 minutes in a competitive industry, whether it's tech, healthcare, the arts, finance, they know that the professional world is rarely a perfect meritocracy where only hard work is rewarded. It relies heavily on leverage, reciprocity, and knowing who to call.
And being able to name those dynamics is the first step to mastering them.
Spot on. Mastering this vocabulary doesn't just make you sound sophisticated at a dinner party. It gives you a literal treasure map for navigating and surviving complex corporate power structures.
Absolutely. Because if you can name the dynamic happening in the room, you can control your place within it.
Right. So before you can leverage a network, you have to physically build it. You have to step into the social ecosystem.
The initial entry point, the literal physical space where connections are forged, a conference hall, a gala, maybe a post-merger cocktail hour.
Yeah, and in these masterclass notes, they paint this vivid picture of a networking event to illustrate the first core concept. A highly charismatic, connected professional walks into a crowded room. And they don't just grab a drink and stand by the appetizer table waiting for serendipity to happen.
No, they engage in an activity known as working the room.
Work in the room.
The notes define this as the physical and social act of moving strategically through a party or a conference. You are shaking hands, you're making small talk, introducing people to each other, and ensuring you make a positive impression on as many key players as possible.
The example they give from the source is great. It says, Sarah is a master at networking. Within 20 minutes of arriving at the gala, she had completely worked the room and collected a dozen business cards.
When you stop to actually analyze the verb choice there, working the room, it's incredibly telling. It is an active verb.
Yeah, it implies effort.
Immense intentionality and, frankly, labor. Charismatic professionals don't view a social event as a place to simply relax or organically let conversations happen. They view the room as a chessboard.
A chessboard. See, that implies a level of calculation that I think makes a lot of people uncomfortable.
It does, but it's accurate. Think about a chess match. Every move of every piece is calculated to control the board, to open up pathways, and to protect your assets. Working the room is the social equivalent of that kind of spatial and strategic awareness.
So you're plotting a trajectory.
Exactly. You are calculating who holds the social gravity in the room, like the person everyone is subtly orienting their body towards. You figure out who you need to be seen talking to, and perhaps most importantly, you're calculating how to elegantly extract yourself from a conversation that has run its course without causing offense.
Wow.
It is highly calibrated psychological labor.
See, I want to explore the nuance of that because it sounds a bit Machiavellian when you put it like that.
Yeah.
Is working the room really always this calculated, strategic, physical workout? Or is it just being a natural extrovert?
What do you mean?
Because I know plenty of extroverts who get massive energy from crowds. They love to talk.
Mm-hmm.
But they walk into a networking event, they find one person who shares their obscure hobby, and they end up talking to them in the corner for 3 hours. They had a great time, but they certainly didn't work the room.
Right, that's the critical distinction. Extroversion is a personality trait. Working the room is a skill set.
Ooh, I like that.
An extrovert might have less anxiety entering the room, but without strategy, they are just socializing. Working the room requires a detachment from your own immediate gratification. You aren't there just to have a good time or talk about your hobbies. You are there to map the ecosystem and insert yourself into its vital pathways. It requires overriding your natural impulse to just settle into a comfortable chat.
That makes me think of an analogy. It's less like playing chess and more like a bee pollinating a garden.
Oh, that's really interesting. Walk us through the mechanism of that. How does the bee operate in this scenario?
Think about it. A bee doesn't just fly into a vast garden, find the first magnificent sunflower, and decide to take a nap on it for the rest of the afternoon.
Right.
It moves with absolute relentless purpose. It flies from flower to flower, taking a little bit of nectar, which in this context is information, or a business card, or a little bit of social capital. But it's not just a one-way extraction.
It's giving something back.
Exactly. The bee is also transferring pollen. It's making introductions. It's saying, oh, you're looking for a new supply chain vendor. Let me introduce you to the logistics expert I just spoke to over by the bar. The bee is cross-pollinating the room, transferring value everywhere it lands. And by doing so, the bee becomes the single most essential entity in that entire ecosystem.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it because it highlights the generative nature of the act. The value isn't just in what you extract from the room, it's in the connections you facilitate between others.
Yeah, you become indispensable.
The person who works the room effectively becomes the central node of that temporary social network. You become the broker of introductions, and people always remember the broker. When those two people you connected end up doing business together, they attribute a portion of that success back to you. You've generated social capital out of thin air just by knowing how to move physical bodies together in a room.
Which brings up the sheer physical and emotional stamina it requires.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to remember names, recall details from past conversations, read micro-expressions to see if someone is bored or engaged.
All while smiling.
Yes. and constantly scanning the periphery for new opportunities, maintaining a veneer of relaxed charm. It's exhausting just talking about it.
Which is why, as you pointed out, even natural extroverts can struggle with it. It's a performance. It's deliberate, active engagement with the environment.
So, listener, I want to turn this directly to you right now. Think about your own style. Do you consider yourself someone who is good at working the room at a party or event?
Yeah.
Why or why not? Do you instinctively take on that broker role, cross-pollinating the space like the bee? Or do you find the whole chessboard aspect of it completely draining?
It's worth spending some time unpacking that for yourself, because if you are the person who dreads the room, the wallflower who feels overwhelmed by the noise and the shifting dynamics, recognizing that aversion is incredibly powerful. Well, you don't have to suddenly become the bee. But if you understand the mechanics of what the bee is doing, you can position yourself strategically. You can find the person who's working the room and let them facilitate the connections for you. You can leverage their labor.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah.
You don't have to be the one flying around if you know how to attract the pollinator.
Yeah.
But establishing that initial contact, getting into the room and moving around it is really only the preamble.
Right.
Once you are working the room, how do you project your value? We move from the physical movement to how people attempt to establish status. And this brings us to a fascinating contrast in the masterclass notes. They contrast a negative tactic with a genuine advantage.
The curriculum presents this through a brilliant dichotomy, a counterfeit currency of power versus a genuine altitude. It examines a widely mocked negative tactic and compares it directly to a very real, tangible advantage.
Let's start with the counterfeit currency, projecting power, the act of name dropping. We all know it when we hear it, but the way these notes break down the imagery is so evocative.
Yeah, they define name dropping as a slightly negative, highly critical verb.
It means constantly, usually awkwardly, mentioning famous, powerful, or important people you know simply to impress your listener and artificially inflate your own importance.
The physical imagery embedded in the phrase itself is quite profound when you really look at it. Imagine holding a heavy, valuable object. In the social context, the object is the name of a famous or powerful person.
Right.
And you casually, intentionally drop it into the middle of a perfectly normal conversation, simply to hear the loud noise it makes when it hits the floor.
The loud clunk of the dropped name. It completely disrupts the natural flow of the conversation. The example from the text captures that awkwardness perfectly. It says, the insecure person at dinner spent the entire evening name-dropping the mayor and the CEO.
And the result of that?
It just made him look insecure rather than influential.
The disruption is the point, though. If we connect this to the bigger picture and look at the psychology behind the drop, why do people engage in this behavior, especially when it so often makes everyone around them cringe?
Because they want to seem important.
Exactly. Name-dropping is an attempt to manufacture the illusion of power. It is an artificial status boost revealing deep insecurity. When someone drops a heavy name, they are essentially trying to borrow that person's gravity because they fundamentally recognize that they lack their own.
Oh, wow.
They are hoping that by standing right next to the loud, echoing noise of the mayor's name, you, the listener, will subconsciously confuse the mayor's importance with their importance. They want the associative glow.
But it creates this massive cognitive dissonance for the listener, right? Because an astute professional, someone who is fluent in this currency of connections, hears that loud clunk, and they don't diagnose power. They immediately diagnose insecurity.
Exactly. It reveals a deficit. It broadcasts a very clear, unintended message to the room. I do not believe I am interesting, competent, or powerful enough on my own merits to hold your attention, so I must conjure the ghost of someone who is.
It is a defensive mechanism disguised as an offensive flex.
That is perfectly stated.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The curriculum contrasts this noisy, insecure, counterfeit tactic with the people who actually possess the power being claimed, the people who have, quote, friends in high places.
A classic, deeply ingrained social metaphor in the English language, and one that tells us a lot about how human beings organize hierarchies in our minds.
The idiom having friends in high places means your network consists of people who hold immense power, wealth, or authority.
Right.
And the notes explain that high places isn't just an abstract concept. It literally refers to the physical architecture of power. The top floors of skyscrapers, the executive boardrooms, the penthouse suites, the highest echelons of government.
The physical altitude perfectly matches the social altitude. The example they use is, I have no idea how that tiny, unknown startup secured a meeting with the national bank, but their founder clearly has friends in high places.
Notice the spatial dynamic there. Power, historically, architecturally, and psychologically, moves upward.
Always. We inherently defer to verticality. The king's castle is always built on the highest hill to oversee the valley. In the modern era, the CEO's office is on the top floor with the panoramic view, while the rank-and-file employees are on the ground floor or in the basement.
So true.
To have friends in high places means you have established a direct vertical lifeline. You are connected to the people who have the vantage point to see the whole board.
But going back to the contrast with name dropping, here is the profound irony that I absolutely love about this framework. Those who actually have friends in high places, the people who possess genuine altitude, rarely ever need to name drop them.
Oh, absolutely. The silence of true power versus the loud, clunky noise of the dropped name.
If that startup founder really is best friends with the president of the national bank, they aren't standing around at a cocktail party shouting about it to anyone who will listen. They are just quietly booking the meeting.
Right.
Real power whispers, insecurity shouts. When you have the genuine currency of friends in high places, you don't need to flash counterfeit bills by name-dropping at dinner. The results speak for themselves. The media appears on the calendar. The permit gets approved. The obstacle simply vanishes.
That's a vital distinction for the listener to absorb. The possession of actual structural power is often completely invisible until the exact moment it is exercised, which is why the X-ray machine analogy you opened with is so apt. You can't see the vertical lifeline until it pulls someone up.
But establishing that genuine altitude, having those friends in high places, is really only half the battle. Storing potential energy doesn't do you any good if you don't know how to release it.
Exactly.
Which is where the actual mechanics of hidden influence come in. Having established that real power resides in high places, how is that power actually activated? This leads us to the hidden, sometimes manipulative mechanics of getting things done.
The theatrical mechanics of influence, the concept of pulling strings.
The masterclass notes call this a brilliant theatrical metaphor, and it really is so evocative. To pull strings means to use your hidden influence, your secret connections, or your unstated power to manipulate a situation or get a special favor.
And crucially, as the notes emphasize, it usually means bypassing the official rules, jumping the waiting list, or circumventing the standard operating procedure.
The imagery of the marionette is central here, and we shouldn't gloss over it. A wooden puppet, seemingly moving on its own accord on a brightly lit stage, but actually controlled by fine, invisible threads held by a puppet master operating in the shadows above.
It implies that the action we see on the surface is not self-determined. Someone else is pulling the levers.
The example from the text is one that anyone who has ever worked in a large bureaucratic organization will feel deep in their bones. The director missed the official application deadline for the grant, but he pulled a few strings with the committee and got the proposal reviewed anyway.
Now, this raises a deeply philosophical question about the nature of modern work and the systems we build. It highlights the profound tension between meritocracy and leverage.
Right.
We desperately love to believe in the meritocracy, that the rules apply equally to everyone, that deadlines are rigid, unyielding boundaries, and that the objectively best proposal wins based purely on its merits. But pulling strings operates entirely outside the standard rules.
It does.
The very existence of the phrase pulling strings and our universal understanding of it reveals that official structures almost always have hidden secondary control mechanisms.
It's like there's the official rule book that they hand you at orientation, and then there's the shadow rule book, and the shadow rule book is written entirely in the currency of connections.
Exactly. When you are the one waiting patiently in line, following every directive in the official rulebook, and someone else suddenly appears at the very front of the line without having waited a single minute, you realize that the line itself is an illusion for those who know who is holding the strings. The bureaucratic red tape only applies to those who don't have scissors.
Okay, I have to push back here, or at least challenge the inherently negative connotation that we're drifting toward.
Let's hear it.
Because when we use terms like shadow rulebook and bypassing rules, it sounds incredibly nefarious. It sounds corrupt. But is pulling strings always a fundamentally bad thing? Let's look at that specific grant director example from the notes. Yeah. Let's say their team's proposal is groundbreaking. Maybe it could literally cure a disease or save a vital community program from going under. But the server crashed at 11:59 p.m., and they missed an entirely arbitrary digital deadline by exactly 3 minutes. The official, blind, algorithmic rules say they are disqualified. Is it unethical for the director to call a former colleague on the committee and say, "Hey, You know us, you know our work is vital, the system glitched, let us through? Or is it sometimes absolutely morally necessary to pull strings to cut through mindless bureaucratic red tape?
I hear that defense, and it's the justification used every single time a string is pulled. But let's look at the systemic cost. I won't concede that it's just cutting red tape.
Really, even in that scenario?
Even in that scenario, when that director pulls strings for a subjectively good cause, they're inherently overriding the meritocracy for everyone else. By pushing their late proposal onto the desk, they are mathematically pushing someone else's proposal down the list. Someone who did navigate the server, who did meet the deadline, who followed the rules. The system wasn't bypassed, it was hijacked.
But what if the meritocracy itself is broken? What if the rigid structures we build to ensure fairness actually stifle innovation, punish minor technicalities, and lack all human common sense? In those moments, the ability to pull a string, to appeal to a human relationship rather than a blind policy, feels less like corruption and more like a necessary safety valve for a deeply flawed system.
That is exactly the ethical gray area where all of this operates and why the debate is so endless. You are arguing for relational power over structural power. You are arguing that human judgment should override algorithmic fairness. And that's a compelling argument when you are the one holding the strings.
Fair point.
If you are benefiting from the bypass rule, it's a necessary favor or common sense. But if you are the person whose proposal was knocked out of the running by the late entry, it is blatant cronyism. It is a rigged game.
That duality is wild. The exact same action is either a heroic circumvention of red tape or a corrupt abuse of power, entirely depending on where you are standing in relation to the puppet.
And that subjectivity is exactly why fluency in this vocabulary is so crucial. You have to be able to read the room and understand when a string has been pulled and recognize the mechanics of it, regardless of how you morally judge it in the moment. You have to know that the shadow rulebook is in play.
So listener, let's make this tangible for you. Tell us a story, maybe jot it down in your notes, about a time you had to pull strings to get something done. And I don't mean something nefarious. Maybe it was getting a table at a fully booked restaurant because you knew the chef.
Or getting a doctor's appointment bumped up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or expediting a passport application through a family friend. Or maybe it was something massive at your company, like getting a budget approved outside the normal cycle. Think about the exact mechanics of how you bypassed the official route. Who did you call? What was the unstated agreement? And crucially, how did it feel? Did you feel a pang of guilt for skipping the line? Or did you just feel a surge of immense relief and power?
As they reflect on that, it's important to transition to the next reality of this system, because pulling strings is rarely free.
Nothing is free. The puppet master doesn't operate the marionette just for the artistic thrill of it. There is a cost. The strings are powered by an unspoken economy of favors, which brings us into the mechanics of that economy. We are looking at the biology and the legality of reciprocity.
The fundamental rules of exchange that govern these hidden transactional relationships.
The curriculum gives us two incredible phrases here that mean essentially the exact same thing in terms of outcome, but they originate from wildly different stages of human evolution. The first is a deeply biological metaphor. You scratch my back and I'll scratch yours.
It's wonderfully primal.
It really is. The imagery here strips away all the corporate veneer and takes us straight back to the animal kingdom. Think of primates like monkeys or apes sitting together in the jungle canopy, grooming each other. An individual monkey physically cannot reach the center of its own back to pick off a parasite or scratch a deep itch. It is an anatomical impossibility.
Right, they literally can't do it alone.
Exactly. So to relieve that burden, it must make itself vulnerable. It must turn its back to another monkey and entirely rely on a partner.
It is the absolute foundation of mutual benefit and contingent cooperation. The source material provides a very modern corporate translation of this primal act. If you can help trade a law firm internship for my kid, I'll make sure your company wins the corporate catering contract for our next event. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
From picking bugs off a monkey in the jungle to securing a lucrative corporate catering contract, the underlying mechanism is identical. If you do this favor for me, which costs you something, I promise to do a favor for you in the future, which will cost me something.
What's fascinating to me here is the evolutionary psychology behind reciprocity. I'll trace this evolution for a moment. Grooming in primates isn't just about hygiene. It is the fundamental glue of their social hierarchy. It is how they build trust. It is how they establish alliances and de-escalate conflict for primal survival.
So it's deeply hardwired.
Yes. When we use the phrase, "you scratch my back," We are tapping into millions of years of evolutionary psychology that dictates that our survival in a group depends on contingent cooperation.
Contingent cooperation. That implies a calculated tracking of debts. I will only expend my energy and political capital on you if I trust that you will expend your energy on me when my back itches.
Precisely. It is an informal ledger of favors. But as human society evolved and our transactions became infinitely more complex than grooming, we took that biological necessity and we formalized it. We codified it into law, into binding contracts, and into sophisticated human language, which brings us to the second phrase provided by the masterclass notes for this exact same concept.
Yes, the former, highly sophisticated Latin equivalent, quid pro quo.
Quid pro quo. It literally translates from Latin to something for something.
The notes explain that native English speakers use this phrase constantly in legal, political, and high-level corporate environments to describe entirely contingent exchanges. An exchange of goods, services, or massive favors where one transfer is entirely dependent upon the execution of the other.
Now, the masterclass curriculum uses a classic political scenario to illustrate this. The example reads, a politician's vote as a quid pro quo for a massive campaign donation.
A heavy example.
It is, and I need to state explicitly right here, we are remaining entirely impartial. We are not taking sides or making any political judgments about lobbying or campaign finance. We are strictly analyzing the linguistic and transactional nature of the phrase as provided in the source material.
Absolutely. The focus here is purely on the mechanics of the language. Mechanically, quid pro quo is just the grown-up suit and tie version of scratching backs. But I marvel at how the exact same underlying human behavior, a contingent exchange of favors, is described so differently based on the setting and the stakes.
How do you mean?
Well, if I help you move your heavy couch into your new apartment and you buy me a pizza and a beer, that's casual biology. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. It's friendly, it's communal. But if the exchange involves millions of dollars in corporate assets, binding legal contracts, or legislative votes that affect millions of people, suddenly we drop the monkey metaphors entirely and we start speaking ancient Roman Latin. Quid pro quo.
Why do you think that is? What does the Latin do for the people in the room?
It acts as a linguistic shield. The stern, legalistic language formalizes what is, at its core, a primal, almost base trait of favors. It protects the ego and the status of the people involved. It allows them to engage in transactional behavior without feeling like they are just haggling at a bazaar.
That is an incredibly astute observation about cognitive dissonance. The language dresses up the behavior to make it socially acceptable in a boardroom or a courtroom. We use Latin to distance ourselves from the raw transaction, but the underlying engine, the strict requirement of reciprocity, the ledger of debts, remains entirely unchanged. A string is pulled, a back is scratched, a quid is given for a quo. The vocabulary scales, but the human nature remains constant.
It's all connected. The ecosystem is completely interlinked. Which brings us to the climax of this entire journey through the currency of connections. We've looked at how you enter a room and begin the physical labor of networking. We've examined how you project status and altitude. We've debated the shadow rulebook of bypassing official channels. And we've analyzed the primal and legal rules of trading favors.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. And finally, we look at the ultimate judgments passed on professionals in this arena. We are looking at the harshest insult for unearned success versus the absolute highest compliment for networking mastery.
The pitfalls and the pinnacles of social capital. Let's start with the pitfall, the absolute nadir of professional respect.
The phrase is riding on someone's coattails.
This takes us out of biology and out of Latin and into a historical sartorial metaphor.
The notes explain that historically, a formal men's tailcoat, the kind you'd see in the 18th to 19th centuries, or on a modern tuxedo, had two long flaps of fabric at the back, known as the coattails. Imagine the physical imagery the phrase is trying to invoke here.
That's a great image.
You have a highly successful, fast-moving, brilliant person running forward, generating immense momentum, wearing this formal coat. And another person runs up right behind them, grabs a hold of those two long flaps of fabric, and just allows themselves to be dragged to the finish line. They don't take a single step of their own. They generate no forward motion.
It is a devastating insult in the professional world because it implies a total and complete lack of inherent value. It implies that your altitude is entirely counterfeit.
The examples provided in the notes hit really hard. The producer isn't actually talented. He's just relying on a brilliant sister and riding on her coattails. Or, in a corporate setting, the vice president with no original ideas is just relying on the CEO riding on her coattails.
Let's connect this back to the broader network ecosystem we've been building throughout this deep dive. Riding coattails is fundamentally parasitic. Think back to the monkeys grooming each other. That was a symbiotic relationship. Both parties benefited.
Right.
The bee pollinating the garden was generative. It created value for the whole ecosystem. Even a quid pro quo, as transactional as it is, involves an exchange of value. But riding on coattails offers zero reciprocity.
Right. The person doing the dragging is gaining nothing. In fact, they are actively being slowed down by the dead weight of the person holding onto the fabric. It is the exact antithesis of working the room. The person riding coattails isn't a bee cross-pollinating the garden. They are a tick.
Oof, a tick. That is a brutal but perfectly accurate extension of the metaphor. You are dead weight.
Yeah.
You are draining the host's social capital and momentum without contributing any of your own. And the most dangerous part for the person riding the coattails is that everyone else in the room can see the fabric stretching.
That's the terrifying reality of it. You might successfully get dragged to the finish line. You might get the promotion or the title or the corner office. But the entire network knows you didn't run the race. Your social capital is entirely hollow. The moment the person you're holding on to stops running or decides to shrug off their coat, you collapse. You have no independent standing.
Which is why the ultimate goal of a master strategist, someone who truly understands the currency of connections, is the exact opposite of this parasitic state. They don't want to be dragged. They want to be the source of the momentum.
Which brings us to the pinnacle, the highest state of networking evolution, according to this curriculum. When you have mastered working the room, when you understand the mechanics of pulling strings, and when you can seamlessly manage complex reciprocity, you achieve a state described by a distinctly modern technological metaphor. You are plugged in.
To be plugged in, it is the most contemporary idiom in our entire linguistic journey today, moving us from 19th century fashion into the modern electrical grid.
The notes break down the mechanics of the metaphor beautifully. Think about the phrase literally. If an appliance is disconnected from the wall, it has no power. In a corporate ecosystem, information is the electricity. Data is the current.
Exactly.
If a computer is not on the network, it has no data. If you aren't wired directly into the flow of that current, your social capital is essentially running on dead batteries.
Yeah.
Idiomatically, to be plugged in means to be supremely connected to the real-time flow of exclusive information. You know exactly what is happening behind the scenes of an industry before it ever becomes public knowledge.
The example provided in the text perfectly illustrates the immense value of this state. David knows the truth about the corporate merger because he is incredibly plugged in with the board of directors.
So what does this all mean? Let's synthesize this whole journey, because this is where all the concepts converge. A master strategist navigating these complex corporate power structures. They don't want to be a puppet on a string waiting for some shadow director to pull it. They certainly don't want to be the deadweight parasitic tick dragging on someone else's coattails.
They don't want to be a dependent attachment to the system at all.
Exactly. They want to be the electrical grid itself. Being plugged in means you are a conduit. You are the infrastructure where the exclusive information and the flow of power travel. Fluency in these concepts is the ultimate way to get plugged in.
You transition from being a piece on the chessboard to being the player moving the pieces. Or perhaps more accurately, you become the board itself. The person who is truly plugged in is revered because they are a symbiotic conduit. You are invaluable to everyone because you are connected to everything.
It is just an incredible linguistic journey we've been on, mapping corporate power from the physical, exhausting act of work in a room, down through the biological grooming of trading favors, to the modern, high-speed electrical grid of exclusive information.
It's the architecture of human ambition mapped out in idioms.
And to you, the learner listening to this, we want to remind you why we took this deep dive in the first place. Whether you are navigating the chaotic, intimate waters of a tiny startup, or you are trying to survive the Byzantine politics of a massive corporate merger, these dynamics are always at play. This vocabulary is your strategic toolkit to analyze and master office dynamics.
Absolutely.
But as we wrap up this exploration of power and language, I want to leave you with a new angle to ponder. Our expert has a thought experiment that builds directly on that final pinnacle metaphor of the electrical grid.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. If being plugged in is the ultimate goal, what happens when the network itself undergoes a massive disruption? Think about an actual electrical grid. If the power source, let's say the CEO, the board, or the industry standard that your entire career relies on, if that power source suddenly changes, does an incredibly plugged-in person instantly lose all their social capital.
Oh.
The grid they spent years wiring themselves into just went completely dead. It's worth asking yourself right now, as you look at your own career, are you plugged into just one outlet, or have you wired yourself into the whole building?
That is the question to take with you to your next networking event. Because when the inevitable blackout comes, you want to be the one with the backup generator, not the one holding a dead cord. What a profound place to leave it.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take this toolkit, go out there, work the room with purpose, and keep building your social capital.
It's been an absolute pleasure to unpack the hidden mechanics of this language with you. Until next time, stay curious and stay connected.
Catch you on the next deep dive.